Hey, what up? Let's talk about what comp you can use in Mythic Plus to clear quicker, time more dungeons, and generally farm more crests, with the changes brought to us by the Turbo Boost event. Obviously, people are worried about them not being invited into groups or not being sure if they should invite non-meta specs. That's always going to be a problem. Listen, I know you are having a hard time getting into a key, but as we have seen in the MDI, the meta specs we know are not the only ones that can push keys, and if you want to play a different spec, here's what you have to know. In our opinion, there are 5 main criteria you want to be aware of when either playing a spec or looking to form a party, being it with friends in a pre-made push group or with pugs. By getting these 5 things down, your party will be significantly stronger and, by the way, will include most if not all specs in the game. And as a bonus, I will tell you how we invite pugs that are not meta and still manage to time keys 13s and up. First of all, the most important thing you want above all else is just a Bloodlust spec, more than anything else, more than a meta spec or a general meta comp. Yes, I believe it's better to kick that unholy DK in your group if it means you can get a hunter with a Bloodlust. 30% haste 3 to 4 times in a dungeon actually makes certain pulls possible in high keys or incredibly easy in low keys for 2 main reasons. The main obvious one is clearly the fact that you do more damage and kill stuff quicker. Everyone knows that. The thing is, if only the DPS would get the 30% haste, it might still not be enough, because much to the dismay of said DPS, your healer might need it more than you. I say might kind of to point out how important it is, but it's just likely just as important for your healer as it is for your DPS. Unless you have healed dispatch, you have no idea how much your party's HP bar will yo-yo during a big pull in Priory, where inevitably you will no longer have kicks to stop the casts, and some of them will go through almost always at the same time as a sacred toll from one of the paladins or the channeled ability from the light spawn. And if not, the bigger the pull, the tougher the key. And the more off meta your tank, your healer needs to keep the party up while also pumping heals into the said tank, since past a certain point, the tank might actually be the one most in danger. 30% haste kills the pack faster, but on a big enough key, you won't be able to survive long enough to pump your damage if your healer just doesn't have enough time to cast all of the heals necessary to keep your and your friends' butts alive. And speaking of staying alive, the second arguably most important thing to get is a combat resurrect ability. Now, we could actually argue over whether this is less important than how I am considering it to be, since you can replace it with a jumper cable, aka the engineering consumable anyone can buy to resurrect an ally. This actually has a very small chance of malfunctioning, which happened to me only once, but half the time we had a CR in class in our party anyway, so the statistics is a little bit iffy, making it actually a bit scarier, because if it does malfunction, not only do you not res your party member, you lose your resurrect. At least I think so. Now, if it fails and the key is high enough for your group, it's likely a failed key at that point. First of all, resurrecting someone with cables is drastically worse than with a class that can do it at range. The person that died, half the time, died inside of a fire or poison puddle. And being resurrected implies you going inside that very same puddle to get him or her up, meaning that even if you actually do manage to pull it off, you are still both inside of a puddle, likely at least one defensive cooldown used on the healer, and the healer needing extra HPS to keep you guys alive, let alone bring you to full. The other part is the actual walking. Even if it's not inside of a puddle, there is a difference in casting the world's worst combat resurrect ability, Soulstone, in 2 seconds from a safe spot as opposed to walking wherever the dead person is, using the cable for just as long if not longer, and then getting back to where you were before. A situation where someone requires a combat res isn't a situation that's simple to navigate. They didn't just die because they goofed, usually. So all of these dangers, although manageable, the degree of risk is so high that it can put the key in jeopardy even if it happens once. Get a combat resurrect class if possible, please. The third most important thing is the damage profile. When you see these top meta parties clearing keys impossibly difficult, you might not realize why they want an arcane mage alongside a balanced druid or an unholy DK alongside a balanced druid. And that's because all of these specs have a different damage profile that solves one of 3 problems each. And these 3 types of damage problems dictate who you want to get into your group. The first and most basic one is Giga AoE damage, and I know what you are thinking. Bro, I do Giga AoE damage on my healer, I'm so good at the video game. I get it, you are a superstar, but there's a difference between a Fury Warrior doing a lot of damage on a big pull and a skilled Fury Warrior competing with a skilled balanced druid that's just as good on the first pull of Cinderbrew or Priory. There's no actual competition. Some specs are AoE capped, and just because they are, it doesn't mean they won't do damage in big pulls. But take a Windwalker and a Marksmanship, and there is no competition. Big AoE, like Balanced Druid, Unholy, and so on, helps clearing pulls bigger than normal, so you end up saving a lot of time in a key. Most of the times, you will do these pulls with a Bloodlust on top of it all, putting a lot more value into your performance in just 30 to 40 seconds of a key time. However much damage Assassination can do in a whole run, when it comes to AoE, shit will just die faster with a Balanced Druid. Of course, Balance isn't the only one, but it has been the premier AoE spec in Dungeons for almost 3 years now and counting. But for that, it sacrifices something, that being priority damage or single target damage or both. There's a slight difference between the two, but let's put them together here because this is a problem that is solved by specs like Arcane Mage or Windwalker Monk. Arcane Mage in particular has the best priority damage in the game, and if you don't know what this means, think of a difficult pull, Priory or Cinderbrew for example. Both of these dungeons have very dangerous mobs like the hired muscle in Cinderbrew or the knights and mini-bosses in Priory. Arcane essentially sinks all of its DPS into one target, and from that target it cleaves onto the rest. The overall damage you do might be lower by the end of the key, but that one target usually dies way quicker than the rest of the pack, whereas if you had, say, 3 balanced druids instead, everything else would just die first and you would be left with that one target. And that particular enemy is usually what will wipe your group. So killing it faster, not just first, makes the pull significantly easier, saves defensives on your party and healer, or if anything, just possible once the key is high enough. This usually translates into boss damage as well, and I say usually because, take Windwalker for instance, it might even have more boss damage than an Arcane, but the priority damage is way lower since you cleave 5 targets really hard, 1 target slightly harder, and the rest you tickle. There are other specs like this as well, but ultimately you want a spec that can help with single target in some way, whether it is boss damage or priority damage. And I believe boss damage is more important, which is why I see both of these as the same problem or solution. And since Arcane can do both, it solidifies its place as a meta spec, while Windwalker is considerably lower ranked overall. And last, it would be generic damage or a combination of both. I guess the best example of this could be Red Paladin. Specs like Red Paladin seem to do well in all scenarios, and at higher keys the performance seems to skew heavier into single target. But one dungeon can have Reds competing with Arcane on boss damage, another with balance on AoE. Maybe this spec is a god, or maybe things are not so easily classified for a lot of the specs. We have tried to kind of break these down on screen for you to give you an idea by using top logs from difficult dungeons and analyzing boss damage, pure AoE damage, priority damage on lieutenants, and this is the best that we could come up with. But keep in mind, there are more nuances to this. For instance, Arms Warrior seems to be generic in all accounts, but add a lieutenant with 1,000,000 adds and it will do giga priority damage, or add adds to a boss fight where you can use sweeping strikes and there's likely no better spec, even if it will lose in single target to most specs in the game. Add to this player skill in reference to their party, and it's unlikely you can say 100% what one spec is best at. I still don't know what Shadow is supposed to do, by the way. The next 2 bits I will address together since it's not clear what the priority should be, but I want to mention the party buff and utility. Although you could put them in the same boat, you will rarely do in practice. Party buffs are not all equal, of course, although some still seem to shine above others, and what will probably always be best is to get as many different ones without sacrificing what we already talked about. As for utility, most of you might already know this, and rehashing again would basically be a crash course on what your class can do. Two things I want to point out are crowd controls and kicks. In particular, you want to have different types of crowd controls since they will eventually hit DR if they are all the same. Let's say stuns, which would be the most common one. DR is essentially diminishing returns, meaning each subsequent CC of the same type lasts less until the fourth one would eventually fail since the mobs would be immune. Classes like mages are really good because they have gravity lapse as a knock-up and blast wave as a knock-back. Sharing these CCs with maybe 3 other different classes, often not found in the same groups, while almost everyone has a stun. The kicks are fairly self-explanatory. If you run a priest, healer, and a mage, you are already low on kicks, so if you also bring a balanced druid, you need to really understand that that balanced druid has to be able to lock down a pack with Vortex, Typhoon into Silence Beam. This is really strong and interrupting, but it comes with 2 considerations. One is that if the druid doesn't use the beam like that, your party has a ridiculously low number of kicks, making it weak to caster packs. And 2, if it does use the combo correctly, it has used a total of 3 crowd control abilities which it will not have for a while, just to stop some casts. Stopping the cast is important, of course, but as you can tell, very expensive as well. That's why when making the group, think about this side of things as well, or you will have to make drastically smaller pools or different routes to accommodate, or wipe and not understand why you're having an issue with a pack where a dungeon before or with a different group it went so smoothly. And finally, the 5th one is something that has happened this season for the first time, and it is the damage type comp, or the magical comp versus the physical comp. Although not as important as the other ones in our opinion, it can definitely add more overall damage to your group by synergizing classes properly. And this mostly affects the physical comp. The meta that you already know about contains a demon hunter as the tank, a mage, a druid, a death knight, and a priest. As far as the magical part of this group, that's mostly on the demon hunter and mage, since both these specs increase the performance of spellcasters and healers, and classes that do magical damage, of which the DK is 1. The druid and priest just bring versatility and stamina for the obvious benefits. As for the physical comp, it is slightly weaker, about 2 key levels weaker, or 1 at this point, who knows, than the alternative, but has cropped up in the leaderboards, making room for a lot of classes that would have otherwise been disconsidered by the community, despite them being and having been good for seasons on end. Usually in a physical comp, you will have a warrior, usually the tank, a hunter, a monk, and a rogue. Warrior and monk would be the culprits here in enabling this beautiful synergy with their party buffs, while the others would be the sheer brawn needed to time these keys. The last spot is usually a flexible class, likely something with a combat resurrect or even enhancement shaman as an example, since it benefits from the warrior and monk and also comes with yet another strong party buff, but not mandatory. This season is one of the best seasons for M+ in terms of spec representation, if not the absolute best, with more specs and classes than ever before being seen pushing the ranks of the leaderboards. It's a great time to do dungeons and an even better time to play WoW with all the new cool things announced to come, likely the Legion remix, which we covered in this video.